The purpose of this podcast is to briefly introduce myself to the applicant pool of employers working with the Washington Center. Hi, my name is Joseph Brogan, potential intern at your wonderful company in the field of cyber. Today, I'll be discussing my point of view in cyber, mainly that the fundamental of anonymity of the internet is nearly impossible to change. That means that anonymity is a feature, not a flaw. For now, anonymity is inherent in the structure of the internet. One of the critical questions that lies ahead of us is internet international governance. Today, for the most part, rules about the domain of the internet are set by non-profit international organizations. That state of affairs is being challenged. Powerful sovereign nations, recognizing the importance of the internet, seek to exert control, putting their own interests ahead of any other international interests in an open internet community. Indeed, in late 2012, the Syrian government reportedly went to war with its own population in cyberspace, hacking into the computers of oppositional groups to monitor and arrest those members, even as opponents to the regime fought back online. Meanwhile, informal groups of hackers devoted to concepts of internet freedom are doing what they can in battle on other fronts to maintain the internet as outside of nations and their policies. Where that contest will end is anyone's guess. As originally conceived, the internet serves essentially as a giant switching system, routing data from around the globe using general internet protocols. It embeds no other functions like identity or verification of delivery into the protocol. The simplicity of this system is to a large degree the cause of the internet's pervasiveness. All of which means that regardless of whether or not anonymity is good because it protects free political speech, or if it's bad because it allows hackers to hide, it's here to stay regardless. And yet, paradoxically, as we discussed in other lectures on data and big privacy, for innocent internet travelers like you and I, the veil of maintaining anonymity can be readily pierced. Another principle: marginal lines never work in the long run. Cybersecurity is in the midst of its marginal line period. Governments, companies, and other users hunker down behind firewalls and deploy virus protections, intrusion detection systems in a passive defensive effort. Like a marginal line, this system is rather ineffective. Better efforts will require developments of active defenses. Instead of merely standing guard at internet system gateways, we need to look beyond those gateways to assess system patterns and anomalies. From that position, cybersecurity could transition from detecting intrusions after they occur to preventing intrusions before they occur. Another principle: the only certainty is that our protective cyber systems will be ineffective. No matter how well constructed, the cyber domain is sufficiently asymmetric that defeat is inevitable. Someday, somewhere, a cyber attack or intrusion will succeed in ways that one can hardly imagine, with consequences that one cannot fully fathom or predict. It follows that a critical component of any strategy is to plan for inevitable failure and risk management. Also included in this is recovery from it. Another principle: the single and most fundamental principle that I've learned is a sense of humility about my understanding of cyberspace. We must be aware that the cyber domain is a dynamic environment that changes constantly. Today, People use the internet in ways that they did not even imagine a few years ago. At the turn of the century, Facebook didn't exist. Today, it boasts 1 billion users or more. The use of cyber weapons like Stuxnet is so novel that we don't even have a good way to characterize it. So anything that the US or the international community does in terms of legislation or regulation must emphasize flexibility, discretion over mandates and prescriptions. It's quite possible that today's great idea for internet security will kill tomorrow's essential applications of it. And so, as we address cybersecurity concerns, and surely we must, we should all bear in mind as a guiding principle the wisdom of Hippocrates. First, do no harm. Okay. Even though I just said we need to be humble in thinking about the future of cyberspace, I'd like to end my essay on being bold and making some predictions, but only if you promise not to hold me to too much. Because most people do not know what they don't know. The entire future of our engagement in the cyber domain is an unknown unknown. Of course, the cyber domain is not unique in that way. So-called experts routinely misunderstand trends, and their predictions about the future are often wrong, but sometimes they seem almost pressy. And here's one out-of-the-box example. In the classic science fiction novel Marooned in Real Time by Vannevar Vinge, published in 1986, it was imagined that the prospects of the human race as prospects of computing power continued to increase exponentially, while data storage costs became conversely exponentially less. Vinge imagined a world in which individuals each personally owned massive databases and communicated with them through simple thought. And just the other day, I saw the first reports of hardware systems that can read electrical brain impulses. Maybe the fanciful days of communicating by thought by cyber systems aren't really that far off. Even more speculatively, Vinge wrote that this type of pervasive communication with massive databases and artificial intelligences would create a singularity of some sort. He thought that the very fabric of human nature might change, and that the increase of capacity and the increase of analysis and competition on the cyber domain would lead to the disappearance of the physical human race as it transcended to a higher, more evolved plane of existence. Now, maybe you think that's not such a great prospect, but it surely is a fascinating one, and it really is a good book. Now, even though one suspects that such a transformative change is, in our world, unlikely, at least in the near term, what we can be sure of is that developments in cyber technology are guaranteed to bring about changes in ways that are impossible to predict. So, what can we see in the future that's more realistic? Notwithstanding a reasonable possibility of error, here are a few of my thoughts, ranging in order from near-term to longer-term trends. And I've just picked a few possibilities from among many we could speak on. First, cloud computing. Cloud computing is the new developing in thing. Soon its use will become widespread, everyone will rush to it, and the new federal cloud computing strategy isn't called cloud first for no reason. Indeed, the reasons to like the cloud are obvious. Cloud systems allow significant economies of scale. Using them is often cheaper and more efficient at the same time. The cloud is really a name for a variety of services. The fundamental thing that links all of them is that instead of being resident on a user's laptop or tower system, the services are provided by companies whose servers are connected to the consumer through the internet. The types of services available are as broad as we can conceive. on-demand services, on-demand software is being developed that allows users to access the program directly from the cloud. Users don't need to have the data or the programs on their computer systems. All they need are programs that allow them to pull down what they want from the cloud. We sometimes call these less capable systems thin clients. We can think of using the cloud as just a platform so that the consumer is given the ability to employ onto his own cloud infrastructure, his own or purchased applications using programming languages or tools supported by the cloud service provider. We can also think of the cloud as infrastructure, essentially a turnkey, outsourcing hardware, software, data storage, and application development, and other computing resources to the cloud service provider via the net. Or we can just look at the cloud as a service, like a garbage collection service. In this model, a company like Google just rents out data storage on its service to companies and other individuals. All of these services share a common theme. The user, that's me and you, does not manage or control the underlying cloud infrastructure of servers, operating systems, and storage systems. Instead, we get access to the data or applications on an as-needed basis from the cloud service provider. The cloud will bring with it potential security benefits that are parallel to none. When malware attempts to execute in the cloud context, it does so on software that is only virtually connected to your hardware device at home. This often limits or modifies the malware's capacity for harm. What that means is that cyber attacks may become significantly harder to accomplish in a cloud-oriented system. In addition, by its nature, the cloud permits the creation of systems with different levels of trust and different tiers of interaction. Low-level users get only a limited set of permissions. The capacity for malfeasance is limited by the inherent structure of the system, and the only people who can actually corrupt the system are the cloud providers at the top level. But as with everything in the cyber domain, there are two sides to the coin. A tiered structure creates greater potential for catastrophic attack that are successful in a devastating way. The cloud system owner is, in effect, God. He controls all the resources and all the data that's provided by the cloud platform. But that means that a successful attack at this God level will have even worse consequences. Low-level users may not even know the system has been compromised. Of equal concern is the challenge of identifying a trustworthy God. Cloud computing may make human corruption less frequent, but the effects of a security compromise may be much greater. Who would we trust to be the electric grid God, for example? What powers would he have that affect all of us? And if power corrupts, who do we think is deserving of this power? Another consequence of cloud computing is that the promise of the cloud comes with a real risk, one that perhaps we, as a people, have not yet come to grips with fully as of yet. The thin clients we talked about earlier, simple interfaces like Google's Chromebook system that have little independent computing power, all of the data, software, operating systems, and processing resources are stored in the cloud and pulled down to the small netbook when you need them. If that sounds familiar, it should. We're quickly recapturing the way that computer systems operated in the early 1980s, when dumb terminals, a little more than a screen and a keyboard, connected to a mainframe computer maintained by the systems administrator. The administrator made the resource allocation decisions, prioritized work, and controlled access to the processing systems. So the translation is clear. Thin client equals dumb terminal. Cloud equals mainframe. That centralized system of control is fundamentally authoritarian. Today's internet cyber system structure allows and empowers individuals. On a laptop, you can have almost as much processing power and data service capacity, data storage capacity as you want. From that laptop, you can connect to the web and communicate with anyone. You can choose your own software, your own data, you can save, and come and go when and as you please, at least on the general network. But your company may have some rules, of course, about which may burden you in some respect or another. But that's a different story for another time. Granted, with this power comes real risk. You're also responsible for your own security system, the integrity of your own programs. But for many people, that cost is worth the benefit. Independence is a valuable commodity. In a cloud system, or the old mainframe system, the user makes none of these decisions. The software is provided by the system administrator, who stores the user's data and controls what new innovations are made available. The individual loses much of the independence that has made the web a fountain of innovation and education. Now, in a liberal Western democracy, perhaps that's not a problem. After all, American users don't have to choose Google as their cloud provider if they don't want to, or for that matter, move to cloud services at all. But in more authoritarian states, the trend toward the cloud will make citizens even less able to control their own destiny. China will love the cloud structure for these very reasons. The internet empowered the liberty of dissent, and we should be concerned, for the cloud may take it away. Now, let's consider another phenomenon, the development of seemingly independent virtual realities where real-world actors interact online in created worlds. We call these worlds virtual worlds. Users like you and me create online personas called avatars. And these avatars can go out in the virtual world and interact with the avatars of other people. It sounds like a bit like an internet chat room, except that the virtual world is a created space that mimics physical reality, with traffic, weather, houses, everything like that. And virtual worlds, you can socialize, sell things, fight wars, and even make love, all without leaving the comforts of your real-world home. It's quite an unusual phenomenon, and like cloud computing, it comes with both promise and peril. Virtual worlds today include sophisticated games like World of Warcraft, where you can fight a war against trolls and orcs, and systems that more realistically mimic the real world, complete with economic and social interactions, such as Second Life. That's a world where, quite literally, you can live a second life, complete with a job, family, finances, and social activity. These worlds exist on the internet, but are distinct from traditional cyber systems and in many ways defy our ways to modify and monitor interactions that occur within them. For example, Facebook, if its users were a real-world population, Facebook would be the third largest nation state in the world, trailing behind only China and India in size. And some of the more complex virtual worlds are growing impressively large. MapleStory, which is a massive multiplayer game, has over 92 million users. Given the degree to which virtual worlds seek to simulate the real world, we shouldn't be surprised that we face all of the same sorts of potential for criminal or other malevolent behavior in these secondary virtual worlds that we actually find in real life. Already, we've seen sophisticated securities frauds that have virtual worlds consequences. Second Life has reportedly had its first instance of bank fraud. One Second Life avatar started a bank where Second Life money called Linden dollars, which can be purchased for real American dollars, can be stored. And then he stole the money deposited in the bank, just like in the real world. And China has legislated government control over virtual currencies in response to virtual world operators issuing their own currencies and allowing them to be used in the real world to buy their own products. Different risks arise from different situations between the virtual world and real world events. National security, for example, may be threatened when digital and virtual currencies are traded in a virtual world and a matter that results in the real world transfer of funds for purposes of, say, money laundering. The trading of real and virtual funds is, in effect, an unregulated system of exchange. Much like black market money changes on the real world, the core of virtual worlds is a real function, like an economy, even if it only offers trade in digital magic weapons. The situation is ripe for manipulation. This is particularly the case since very little real-world law applies directly in the virtual world. Beyond perhaps the confines of perhaps contractual agreements between the users and the providers, and any application of real-world law is fraught with challenges. If you wanted to guess, I think this is another area where nation-states will try to impose their own laws. After all, every avatar represents the citizen of a real-world nation. So it seems likely that virtual worlds will be yet in another place where we will see Westphalian competition with all of the competition that may bring. Here is another prediction. The insecurity of the internet is sufficiently scary that some people are going to attempt to succeed. As we attempted to discuss, the internet was built without an identity verification protocol. So, by definition, this would be an add-on function. This is one of the reasons that an anonymity and staying anonymous is so hard to eliminate. So why not create a new internet? Why not start over again with a structure that has greater security built in from the beginning? Well, it's nearly impossible to imagine that the already existing cyber domain will ever disappear. It's quite possible to imagine that a series of new alternate internets might be created. But with this, we have to consider it's particularly likely to be tried by those whose particular interests are those of security rather than freedom or privacy. For example, U.S. Cyber Command Head General Keith Alexander has already floated the concept of a .secure network for critical services, such as banking, that would be walled off from the public internet. Access to .secure could be limited to those who submitted to an identity check and those who got authority to authorize and log on to the server. And General Michael Hayden, the former head of the CIA, has put it like this: we need a more hardened enterprise structure for some activities, and we need to go build it. All those people who want to violate their privacy on Facebook, let them continue to play. One thing I could say about this is that these sorts of gated internet communities are, it seems, inevitable and may not be limited to a .secure network. Given the challenges to security and cloud computing and the dim prospects for effective international cooperation, some portions of the system will continue to have almost a Wild West character. To combat this, it's a pretty safe bet that we will build separate communities all over the system, and entrance into these communities will be carefully monitored and available only to trusted participants who agreed to give up their anonymity and agreed to allow strong actions for their actions. In the end, one suspects that the trend to wall gardens will be self-limited. They may well be very prominent in authoritarian countries. China is already a near wall garden behind the Great Firewall. and other great political systems are likely to follow suit. But within the liberal Western democracies, I suspect that this utility will be limited. There will be certain industries, such as the military and the financial industry, where gated internet communities will be welcome. But the basic problem is that the entire concept contradicts the fundamental value of the network. The internet is a network of change and innovation precisely because of its globe-spanning, go-anything, do-anything nature. Those who cower within walls and gardens of their own nature are likely to be safer, but with the brutal competition of technological innovation, it seems inevitable they will fall behind. So, finally, let's go completely outside the box for a few minutes. The entire structure of the internet, and thus all of its power and danger, is tied to the technology that undergirds it, the integrated silicon chip. That chip at the heart of every computer is the physical mechanism that creates the ones and zeros in binary code that drives the internet. What if that weren't the basis of internet communication at all anymore? That's a revolutionary thought. But it's also sort of like thinking, what if we had something that went faster than the horses and buggies without precisely knowing what that something might be? You can imagine how great of a paradigm shift that might be, even if you don't know what the it actually is or will be. We just may be standing on the threshold of such a change like this. Physicists have developed the concept of a quantum computer, a computer whose operations are based on the theories of quantum physics, the same way that our current crop of computers are based on the operations of classical Newtonian physics. The physicists whose theoretical work is at the heart of this potential revolution won the Nobel Prize for their breakthrough in 2012. In quantum physics, it is possible for a particle to be in two places simultaneously and to be entangled with other particles and affect their activity instantaneously, even when the particles are far apart. What Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and what is now known through the modern scientific experiment known as the double-slit experiment in physics. This came from the development of a quantum computer, and it's really quite stunning. In a quantum computer, each piece of data is either a 1 or a 0. Every concept we communicate today, every word, every picture, is just a string of these words, ones and zeros. In a quantum computer, the qubit, that's short for quantum bit, can be either a 1 or a 0, or both a 1 and a 0 at the same time. And when qubits are entangled with each other, they can, in theory, share information instantaneously. In effect, enabling all the entangled qubits to work on a single problem simultaneously, like some massive set of connected classical computers. If ever created, these quantum computers could make the power of contemporary computers puny by comparison, much as the car, airplane, or spaceship left the horse and buggy behind. Because of the indefinite nature of the qubit status, with all the ones and zeros being capable of being ones and zeros on and off at the same time, a 2-qubit system could compute 4 values at once, with a 3-qubit system performing 8, an 8-qubit system performing 16, and so on. This can have immense benefits, as we've discussed. Increases in cyberspeed lie behind much of the technological revolution that we've experienced in recent decades. With quantum computers, they'll be smaller, faster, and possibly cheaper in the long run, meaning that we might see a day where your computer is a small appliance that you wear on your pinky ring. On the other hand, vast computing power brings with it some obvious dangers. Current encryption programs based on large tables of multiplication are amazingly robust and very difficult to break, but theoretical physicists have shown that from a quantum computer, the factoring of a large number into its prime factors and its prime number encryption codes would be trivial. In fact, in August 2012, a quanta computer successfully factored the number 15, suggesting that the theoretical capacity to break prime number encryption may eventually become reality. So, although we are just at the beginning, these developments are not merely theoretical, and at Oxford and Yale, theoreticians have actually built 4 and 8 qubit large computing chips. And when they reach 50 qubits approximately, computing power will match that of a contemporary laptop. Entrepreneurs in Singapore and Canada are breaking into these same types of questions, and Google has been looking at this for more than 3 years. When will a large quantum computer be built? It's impossible to tell. But if one is produced, well, that's a future that could begin to approach Werner Vinge's imaginary new world. If you think the internet and cyberspace are confusing and cutting edge today, imagine what they may be like tomorrow. Do we see? We will always face the same problem: how to reap all the benefits to be gained from increases in efficiency and productivity while minimizing the risks from them. The reality is we can't have our cake and eat it too, but we can, with some effort, make the network safer and more resilient. And that, I think, is an admirable goal. The challenge of achieving that goal is one of the things that makes this area of technology, law, and politics and policy so interesting and exciting. At least it is for me. And I hope it is for you as well. Thank you very much for listening to me on this exploration, and I hope to join you at your internship in the summer of 2018.